is administered by the Ministry of Environment and Tourism. It was passed in 2007. According to that law, no development should take place in Namibia now, whether in towns or in the rural areas. If you are putting up your homestead, there must be an environmental assessment. Now the question is, do you have the qualified people who can make the right environmental assessment and advice? And in fact, now it has become like an obstacle to development, because you have communities, they want to put up their houses, they want to put up their schools, but now you say there must be environmental studies, but who is going to the environmental study so that people cannot settle in the flood areas? So then as a result, if they do that, immigration comes. Finally, talking about the commitment of the government, for example, the African governments, as I was telling you that 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting in Nairobi, where we are preparing for Copenhagen. What we did, we have received the report, progress report from our negotiating team. Of course, the challenges which are there are known. However, Africa is really talking about adaptation as the issue. And the skill development, the transfer of technology, there must be really necessary resources to enable one to adapt. And that, because of climate change being an international issue, it really needs a commitment internationally as much as needed at the government level. Otherwise, the consultations are there, the negotiation team are continuing, and we hope maybe by Copenhagen there might be some breakthrough, but nevertheless, as ministers are ready to go to Copenhagen and make all the efforts for the deal to be sealed.
Thanks so much for that perspective on what's been going on in Namibia and the recent flooding, which we may not all have been aware of. Would you like a response, Craig?
Well, I think we can both respond, and I will tell you right off the top that we do not have that capability at UNHCR. It would take us way outside of our mandate to engage in adaptation strategies of that magnitude and before there is an actual crisis. We're much more related to the crisis itself. But I think the point was made earlier by my colleague that we need to have a much more intense involvement in the whole adaptation area of the development agencies, where you can find that level of expertise, and who should be much more engaged on this issue than I think they currently are. I would love to be corrected on that issue, and if we have anybody here from either UNDP or the World Bank who wants to correct me, I would be delighted to turn the floor over to them. But from my perception, there needs to be a much greater integration of the development agencies with the humanitarian response agencies to be able to deal with exactly this kind of issue, and that is the adaptation strategies necessary to prevent the disasters from occurring in the first place.
Brief word on Joro.
I agree absolutely. I think that none of our these agencies dealing with only the humanitarian side have the capacity to accompany the government. These problems have to be shared within the UN country team as a teamwork, and driven by those who are leading the development in your country. I think it is the best way to do it. On IOM side, what we can bring to you is all assistance that is needed on migration management patterns. Yes, we can do it. But the adaptation plans themselves, they don't depend on us.
Mr. Kobia from the World Council of Churches has a question.
Well, I want to address the issue of human relations related to migration. It is true we have talked of legal instruments, we can talk of policies, principles, etc. But what I see is happening with the enormous numbers that you have mentioned. How are we, or who are you working with to prepare human beings who are citizens of the countries that will be receiving these huge numbers of migrants, which are going to exacerbate the social tensions that already are there?
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? Because we are likely to see that the social tensions and the conflicts and all that will be much deeper. How do we deal with that beyond the legal instruments that we have?
Yeah.
And I think the interrelatedness of the issue of migration and the awareness gaps was mentioned here, but who are you working with? And I think I'm addressing both to the two panelists in order to make sure that in terms of human relations, we know that this is a global problem that we all should be prepared to share the burdens that
absolutely.
are before us.
It is absolutely.
Good question.
It is imperative to work on the human security side and working at the community level on a very integrated base with the international community, all the partners for development that are present in the country and helping the country to get out of poverty, for example. IOM is part of this kind of team. But there is huge work, a social work, you know, that address the very need on security, on human security of the people when this kind of disorder came in a country that need to be addressed. And I must confess, I must also say that many of the governments with which we work, they are absolutely aware about that and ask IOM for help, ask IOM to be part of a team that they settle in the country, and we work on management of the community and taking care about how to address the violence, for example, against women and girls, of course, but violence in general within the community. And it is a real problem we have.
If climate change had no human consequences, we wouldn't be here. I mean, it's really the human consequences that it's all about at the end of the day. So addressing the human side of the issue, I think, is a critically important part of it. Within the countries that will be adversely affected by climate change, the primary responsibility obviously falls to the governments of those countries to address the communications on the human issues there. And there, I think, those outside of the country can assist with respect to capacity building in that area. Do I see a lot of that taking place? Not a great deal, I readily confess. There's another dimension to the human side that I think needs to be addressed, and that's the human side with respect to the donor countries, with respect to the countries that are be less adversely impacted, but who have the means to help on the issue. And this is fundamentally a moral issue. At the end of the day, it's a moral issue. This is humanity trying to save itself. And there we get into the issue of exhortation and working with people, working with publics, and I would say over the next 20 years, working on the publics of the developed world to create a level of understanding of the extent of the suffering that is being caused by climate change. And it's been my experience that when you bring home to the people the suffering, the people will respond to the challenge. But when people live in ignorance of the suffering, they don't respond at all to the challenge.
And
so
when
I
they
think
live next door to somebody who's come from another part of the world, are they so comfortable? I was going to end by asking you these.
It depends on the country. It depends on the circumstances of the country. If the country is capable of absorbing the people, then I think that they often are receptive, particularly when they see the level of suffering that's caused by not being receptive. But many of the countries that have to take either refugees or displaced people in any form are not in a position to take those people without causing suffering of their own people, and therefore they become very reticent. They view that their responsibilities end at their borders on these issues, and quite frankly, it's very hard convincing people to take a different point of view. Now, I don't want to overstate that, because around the world, we rely upon a lot of countries that don't have very much in the way of means to accept refugees, and for the most part, they do so. So on the refugee issue, I think we have had very good responsiveness. We need to get equivalent responsiveness with respect to the people who are displaced as a result of climate change.
But the scale of that could be altogether different.
Well,
I want to bring you back to that point that we started with, President Tong of Kiribati saying, we must migrate with dignity and confidence. Do you both think, hand on heart, that that is likely if we're going to see migration due to environmental reasons on such a scale?